you know? This is on full, right? It's on full.
All the way up.
Tough, not easy, Johnny. You gotta relax. Learn to relax. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to have some laughs? Johnny, do what I do.
Yeah.
I take a porno movie, run it backwards. That way you see the hook and get back the money.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Delta Force Thursday, October the 26th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and Malaguena, we will have new speaker, mass murder, Varney and Company, dumbing down, my take, rules for radical conservatives, no free lunch, rules for patriots, rules for retrogrades, bishop-barron, and Delta Force, inside Delta Force. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Nothing should be more obvious than that the business organism cannot function according to design when its most important parameters of action, wages, prices, interest, are transferred to the political sphere and there dealt with according to the requirements of the political game, or, which sometimes is more serious still, according to the ideas of some planners. Joseph A. Schumpeter. I could have just as easily included this in the sound money section, for the same principle is at play. The price of money does not belong in the political sphere, and neither does the price of wages. The objectives in that sphere are far different than the objectives in the private sector, and I mean that as negatively as could possibly be.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
In the future, everyone will be a criminal for at least 15 minutes. Except us. You probably don't think of yourself as the bad guy in this little morality play. But the first thing we have to get straight between us is that you are. And there's just no getting around it. Whether you couldn't help yourself from the get-go and always embraced traditional and thus suspect ideas about right and wrong, whether you're one of those so-called September 11 conservatives who let a little thing like the murder of nearly 3,000 people irrevocably color their worldview, what you need to keep in mind is this. We don't care. You're a wingnut, and we hate you. I realize this is hard for you to accept. All your life, you've worked hard and played as close to the rule book as your conscience, your bank account, and your spouse allowed. You probably went to college, although not a very good college. A state school seems more your speed than one of the Ivies. You're more likely to work at a trade than a profession. Although chances are you're probably not a member of a union, or at least not an enthusiastic one. And just about the only time you think seriously about politics comes around election time, when you do your civic duty and trudge to the polls, there to pull the lever, ink the dot, or punch the ballot for the candidate who hasn't promised you much of anything in particular, except that he won't upset the apple cart for the next 2, 4, or 6 years. The big issues that play themselves out on the national stage, the pitched battles between right and left, the boilerplate about mourning in America and fundamental change, don't mean much to you. You leave that sort of thing to the chattering classes, the people who write for the New York Times, and then go on shows you don't watch on cable channels you hardly ever turn into, to plug the books they write in their spare time, to tell the president why what he's doing is either right or wrong, and why the American people, guys like you, are too dumb to understand any of this anyway. In short, you don't ask for much except to be left alone. Surveys show that roughly 40% of Americans consider themselves to be conservative, by which I believe they mean that they don't want things to change very much at the local level, that they'll be able to get up every morning pretty much as usual, get to work, assume that their working conditions and taxes pretty much will stay the same, commute home in a decent American or Japanese car, have a drink and some dinner, sleep, and then get up and do it all over again the next day. Buddy, if that's what it means to be a conservative, then it's no wonder I'm a liberal. In other words, you're a normal American. At least, that's the way you think of yourself, or used to, before it became unfashionable, if not yet actually criminal and actionable. You respect the flag. Root for your school's football team. Don't think the paintings of Norman Rockwell are as kitschy as some of your better educated friends say. Have an appreciation of your ethnic heritage that ranges from nil to roots, to the Sons of Erin and the Knights of Columbus. And whether you attend church or synagogue regularly, you're probably not an atheist. But lately, you've started questioning some of your most fundamental beliefs. Lately, crazy, lunatic ideas that you never would have credited in a million years have begun to seem, if not normal, then at least plausible. You're feeling your world sliding away from you, and while you might resent it, you don't dare let on because to do so would seem somehow bigoted. Yes, that's right. You're a bigot. For you to speak up, for you to even attempt to defend what we fervently and fondly hope will soon be your former way of life, for you to try and reassert the verities you were taught as a kid, the truths you once held dear, not just some of them, but as we shall see, all of them, the, so-called moral principles you once thought were unquestionable, for you to take any firm stand whatsoever is just not acceptable. It really is amazing. In just 4 or 5 short decades, they seem short to us because we always take the long view, your entire world has been turned upside down, and you have acquiesced and sometimes celebrated at each step of the way. Sure, we were there, leading the parade, cheering, lofting signs, waving placards, engaging in a mighty mutual orgy of self-congratulations as we applauded this or that historic moment. Naturally, we never told you that our definition of words like historic and unprecedented was simply audacious, brazen, or even ridiculous, since we never in our wildest and most perfervid dreams ever believed you'd actually fall for half the social change we were selling you. But you did. And here we are. From cock of the walk to borderline bigot, and soon guile-willing to hate crime criminal. What a short, strange trip it's been. We hope you've enjoyed the ride so far. I'm thinking that right about now, you must be feeling a little bit like Joseph K. in Franz Kafka's The Trial. Doesn't matter a bit that you've never read Kafka, or that you have no idea what Der Prozess is about. I'm deliberately referring to it in German, so that when Rush Limbaugh attacks me and tries to pronounce the title, he'll hilariously mangle it, rube that he is. Here, as we say in Hollywood, is the pitch. One fine day, Joseph K. gets arrested for no apparent reason, on unknown charges for an unspecified crime of which he has no knowledge. His attempts to uncover the source of his guilt come to nothing. His lawyer is useless. To his horror, he learns from some weird Italian dude, a painter, that no defendant has ever been acquitted. In the end, they kill him. End of story. Not exactly the kind of triumph of the human spirit stuff we love in Hollywood. But if you think of this tale as a cross between No Exit and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you'll begin to get some idea of what we've got in store for you. If only you'll stay quiescent and impotent long enough for us to finally win this battle that's basically been going on since Mike and Lucifer had their little disagreement in Paradise Lost. Oh ho, you're surprised I know about that, eh? That's because we're getting into your head, making you feel uncomfortable in your own country, in your own home, in your own skin, making you feel guilty. In other words, making you feel just like us. Don't worry, what you're feeling is perfectly normal. It's all part of the plan. What plan, you ask? After all, we seem like such nice people. We preach tolerance constantly. It's our protective cloak, our defensive shield, our Tarnhelm against your righteous anger. We never resort to violence when a ruinous lawsuit will do, and we're always ready with an explanation of why your behavior is wrong, immoral, selfish, aberrational, arrogant, or just plain nuts. We will talking cure you to death, set the rules for you, force you to stay inside your head while we romp around in the unoccupied sectors. Stop and think. Don't you now, on some level, believe that up is down, that black is white, that freedom is tyranny, that good is evil? Of course you do, because that's what we want you to think. That's what we've been telling you for more than 75 years. There is no position or proposition too ludicrous for us to argue, and so beaten down are you that you're bound to at least consider what we have to say. Face it, it's so much easier this way. All those commandments about right and wrong, all those bad childhood memories, all those fears and worries, the two favorite words of the New York Times for use in headlines, let them go. They were all an illusion. All those moral scruples, that devotion to hard work, that crazy notion that what you were doing really mattered. Give it up. Listen to our siren song, Carpe Diem. Or as my dad likes to say, if it feels good, do it. As you probably know if you've been reading my columns at National Review Online for the past few years, I'm in real life a novelist and Hollywood screenwriter, living in my palatial mansion in Echo Park near Dodger Stadium and dating the hottest women in Tinseltown, who hop in my Prius along Sunset Boulevard like it was a '59 Corvette, and I'm James Dean. Like my celebrated counterparts on the Times, Frank Rich and Maureen Dowd, I never reach for any deep think when a cheap pop culture reference will do. Long gone are the days of the dinosaur pundits, the Walter Lippmanns, the Stuart and Joseph Alsops, the Flora Lewises. Not that I ever finished even one of her bien-pensant soporific columns at all. And so the pop culture moment I reach for is that horrible scene in Steven Spielberg's brilliant Saving Private Ryan. The scene that for me, for some strange reason I can't quite identify, was the most emotionally powerful in the movie. The scene in which Private Mellish, the Jewish kid from Brooklyn, is killed by Steamboat Willie, the German whose life the platoon's liberal Upham is saved. Sure, we all remember the first amazing 20 minutes, the landing on Omaha Beach on D-Day, the vivid depiction of the carnage, the senseless slaughter, the irony of who lives and who dies. We all remember the opening shot of the men throwing up as their Higgins boats are about to discharge their human cargo into the teeth of the German machine gun fire coming from the pillboxes atop those dreadfully high hills. We remember the ending, when the Tom Hanks character is killed by the same Steamboat Willie he allowed to live against his better judgment.
And that was part 1 of Chapter 6 of Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left.
Rule 5. Risus bellum est. Laughter is war. The only possible response by a sane man to an insane claim is laughter and ridicule. Never buy radical premises. In the course of political badinage, do not settle for reason where action is due, and vice versa. This logic extends with a special force to the needfulness of the scornful guffaw. Laugh openly at your radical opponent's insane, constant recusals of the Christian West. With good reason, the expression, "I will not dignify that claim with a response," bears profound value against radicals, especially in the clownish cultural and political scene today. The act of laughing makes for a devastating weapon of cultural war because there is simply no dignified reply to it. If a man responds line item to a radical's insane proposition in a way which suggests that it deserves more dignity than it actually merits, moderate and incautious listeners nearby may be persuaded in the wrong direction. If they are not persuaded all the way in the wrong direction, they will at the very least lose interest in the prolix dialogue between you and the radical, assuming as they walk away that the truth is probably something of a median between the two positions they heard. On the other hand, if they had heard you simply laugh at the idiotic blasphemy leveled by the radical, your punchy laughter would have well served both their curiosity and their short attention span. In other words, one need not outsmart oneself by avoiding the intuitive schoolyard approach of ridicule. Trust your gut, especially when it tells you to laugh at radical claims. Retrogrades who fail to respond with laughter will end up, in good faith, buying dangerous premises that would have more easily been rejected by simple ridicule in the first place. Not only does this needlessly lengthen what should be quick, pithy conversations with radicals, but more importantly, it lends false credibility to incredible and neurotoxic ideas, even in the shrewd mind of the retrograde. The conventional wisdom by old guard types within the ranks of humble Christianity or center-right politics would be either to listen compassionately without reply or to reason it out slowly in dialogue. Both of these replies are gravely mistaken, which costs their users efficacy and street cred. The latter is earned by satisfying the gut instincts. For example, the proposition that men have penises is now supposed to be controversial. Radical haters of the Christian so-called patriarchy have seen to it that the most fundamental Christian teachings on human sexuality and pretty much everything else are now received as dubious and hateful. This represents abject madness. Listening compassionately to a confused person of this persuasion is never a bad idea in the one-on-one context. But a retrograde, as we have said above, is exceedingly unlikely to find himself in private dialogues with transsexuals. Dialogue will usually be of the public sort. Accordingly, some form of winsome public reply will be needed. Don't borrow trouble. Take shortcuts where they present themselves. The derisive laugh will not be available for all the vast array of radical claims, many of which will have to be forensically dispelled. But where laughter is sufficient, use it. Any thoughtful or even unthoughtful reply, aside from scornful laughter, tendered to a radical who attempts to rebut the obvious fact that only men have penises, will automatically ennoble the inane notion that natural sexuality can be altered. Replying with diligently collected biological data, of course, might winsomely convince an interlocutor who honestly didn't already know this basic fact of human life. But since there are virtually zero honest disbelievers in the fact of two biological sexes, your data and the time you spent to acquire it will have been misspent on fools. Retrogrades' time efficiency and individual reputations will improve sharply upon the habituation of the well-timed, well-placed guffaw of unmuted derision.
Well put. Very, very well put. And that was Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
Reid has previously allowed Republicans to attach unrelated amendments to other important bills in the past few months, but Reid called Paul's measure ridiculous and outlandish and asked Republicans to deal with him on their side of the aisle. Now, that's the kind of leadership I'm talking about. Rand Paul played offense by attaching personhood, the ultimate pro-life principle in action, onto a bill that was expected to pass easily. By doing so, he would either force the Democrats to give him his vote on it or cause them to make total fools out of themselves, as Reid does in this article. Like when Reid expresses incredulity that we could actually debate something as trite and insignificant in the U.S. Senate as when life begins. Given that life is one of the inalienable rights to life posited in our founding document, is there anything more important for our elected officials to be debating? I put that part of the Huffington Post story and a few other lines in bold in the book for a reason, because they're examples of how Rand Paul, by playing offense, grabbed the moral high ground and was making the left accept our premise. Note the article doesn't refer to Rand's pro-life bill as anti-reproductive freedom, but as personhood. If they're going to report accurately on the bill, even the liberal Huffington Post has to use that term because personhood isn't having an argument with anti-lifers about how many kids we're going to permit them to kill, or how we'll let them kill them, or when we'll let them kill them, after they jump through a few hoops. Maybe then they can kill the baby. No, personhood is a debate about whether or not all life is precious and sacred. Personhood is the high ground. Furthermore, Rand Paul got the Democrat Senate Majority Leader to call debating when life begins ridiculous and outlandish. Remember the 2008 presidential forum hosted at Saddleback Church when Rick Warren asked Barack Obama, at what point does an unborn baby deserve human rights? Remember Obama's flippant, that's above my pay grade response? Remember that was one of the few times you actually thought John McCain could win the election? That's because it was about the only time in the entire campaign that McCain grabbed the moral high ground and played offense, with a considerable assist from Warren's question, of course. Rand Paul managed to do something here few pro-life politicians have successfully been able to do for years: get the left off script and reacting to our argument. Reid is so frustrated with what Rand Paul did here, he insisted Republicans deal with him on their side of the aisle. If a committed pro-life Republican wanted to challenge Reid in his next election, they've got one whale of a soundbite to use against him now. The Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate, and everywhere else for that matter, should be constantly emulating what Rand Paul did here. The real question is how come Rand Paul in his second year in the U.S. Senate managed to get under Reid's skin in a way most of the Republicans who have been up there for eons haven't. Rand did something else by doing this as well. He boosted team morale. Now maybe it's a coincidence that Rand did this just 2 weeks after his endorsement of establishment proxy Mitt Romney drew the ire of many of his own supporters. But before we become too cynical, we should note the first bill Rand Paul ever sponsored as a U.S. Senator was a personhood bill. So while the timing may not be a coincidence, it's clear this is a principle that Rand cares deeply about. By playing offense with his principles, Rand changed the conversation from his lackluster endorsement to his bold leadership. He didn't undo all the damage he did to his base with this one gesture, but he took a giant first step towards doing so. Not to be outdone, Senator Ted Cruz has produced a highlight reel of similar moments early in his first term as a U.S. Senator. As a result, there is more excitement for Cruz among the grassroots than any Republican politician I can remember. And it's because he's seen as someone they can play offense with, whether it's a confirmation hearing, taking the fight to the left, or confronting Republicans like John McCain on the floor of the U.S. Senate. As one mainstream media reporter told me off the record, quote, Cruz is a different animal. You ask a lot of these other Republicans a question that requires an answer other than their talking points, and they stall or look to change the subject. But Cruz comes right after the question, turns it around on the questioner if he doesn't like it, and then always has an answer ready to go if he does. This is why I told National Review last year that Cruz isn't just a potential GOP 2016 presidential candidate. He's a potential force of nature. I'm too young to remember the ascendancy of Reagan, but in my lifetime, nobody has better articulated the principles of the conservative grassroots on a national level than Cruz. Throw in his family's powerful testimony as first-generation immigrants escaping tyranny, and he has the total package it takes to take on the ruling class. Leadership always wins, and people love a winner. Remember the mantra of the Republicrats: surrender now before it's too late. The GOP and sadly many conservatives are punch drunk. believing on one hand the majority of the country is with us, while at the same time walking around with the proverbial sword of Damocles dangling over our heads. Conservatives long for a day when America suddenly wakes up and returns to our constitutional Republican roots. But it's hard to do that when conservatives rarely attempt to advance their principles beyond their own enclaves and subcultures. Wacko birds like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and Mike Lee of Utah aren't waiting until there's a Republican majority to push their moral convictions, or waiting for any other harmonic convergence which never occurs that the Republicans say we must have before we actually play offense with our principles. They're acting instead as someone that believes they're accountable to conscience, convictions, and constituents, not the corrupt process or some phony definition of Senate collegiality. During parts of campaign 2012, I was a frequent guest on MSNBC, and just about every time I announced I was going on, a fellow conservative would either email or tweet me that I should never go on that channel because of its leftist leanings. Yet on MSNBC, I've had the opportunity to take some of the most hard-right positions you'll ever see anywhere on national television, and I've even shared my Christian testimony. In fact, I once received the following email from Jonathan Collegio, who is the communications director for Karl Rove's American Crossroads. He wrote, quote, "I've been meaning to reach out for a while, not regarding the Conservatives versus Rhodes sideshow, but because I wanted to thank you for giving some of the best, most fearless, and most succinct remarks on the gospel I've heard on TV ever. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I remember it was on MSNBC, and I suddenly looked up from my desk and saw you basically preaching the good news about Jesus." As the host and the other guests just kind of stood there stunned. It was likely the most gospel-centered message ever given on MSNBC, and I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated it. God has blessed you with great communication skills, and it encouraged me to see you be so boldly talking about Jesus, especially in the face of an audience like that. Last I checked, if you want to govern, you have to win a majority of the hearts and minds of the voters. To win a majority of those hearts and minds at some point means you are going to have to venture into foreign territory with the courage to engage them. That's how we generate converts. St. Paul changed entire cultures with nothing more than the Word of God and a tent-making kit, and he did so under the constant threat of death. The only threat we're under is being mocked or rejected. Sure, after I go on MSNBC, I often get called every nasty name in the book by the tolerance mob. But I've also received several emails from folks who said that because of my willingness to be honest in my analysis and holding Republicans to the same standard as Democrats, and how respectful I was when making my arguments, they're willing to consider what I'm saying, when previously they just dismissed it out of hand. I even had a producer at MSNBC tell me once, "I used to think people like you were crazy, and I'm still not sure I agree with anything you say, but you actually have facts and figures to back up why you believe what you believe. So at the very least, I've come around to understanding how someone could think the way that you do." When Bobby Bowden took over as football coach at Florida State, he scheduled road games at places like Nebraska and Michigan to get his team featured on national television. The Seminoles weren't the college football power back then they eventually became. So Bowden had to accept one-game contracts with no return game in Tallahassee. Still, Bowden decided the exposure for the Florida State brand was worth the risk. That plan eventually paid off. The Seminoles increased exposure to their brand and were able to recruit better players as a result. Those players eventually helped them win some of those road games, and Florida State eventually set a record by finishing in the top 5 of the final AP college football poll, a record 14 consecutive seasons. Bowden eventually surpassed his legendary idol Bear Bryant in all-time wins as well. We have the truth and tradition on our side, meaning that human history proves our principles are true. Every society that has embraced the ideology of the left has been cursed, and every society that has embraced our ideology has been blessed. It's no coincidence that the more we lurch to the left, the worse off the average American becomes. We should be as confident as Breitbart and Bowden in taking our beliefs and brand out into the culture at large and playing offense with them. It's not only to score points and reach the unconverted, but it also keeps up the morale of our own troops and rallies our base. In the 2010 midterm elections, we had a great goal line stand that stopped the left from shoving Obamacare and cap and tax down our throats, which would have been the game-clinching touchdowns for the progressives. However, any knowledgeable football fan knows that when your offense gets the ball back after a goal line stand, you're on your own 1-yard line with 99 yards to go for you to score a touchdown. Fellow Patriot, I believe that is an accurate picture of where we currently stand. We need to start playing offense, and putting the leftists on the defensive. Obviously, 99-yard touchdown plays are rare, but at the very least, we need leaders and arguments that give us some first downs so we can improve our field position. First downs build momentum and get your crowd back in the game. String together enough first downs, and before you know it, you're in position to score a touchdown. And we need touchdowns, not settling for field goals. We are facing, at best, a long generational grind to restore the republic. And the longer we take to go on offense, the longer it will take to preserve freedom and liberty for our children and grandchildren. Take too long, and we'll be out of time altogether.
So that was Chapter 13, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. And he says this is a generational grind. No, it isn't. We can defeat socialism and the socialists overnight. The way you do that is by defeating the useful idiots. Remember, they're broken down into two categories. You've got the people that are down for the struggle, the Robert Reiches of the left, and then you have the useful idiots, which is pretty much everybody else. The people that you and I run into at work, on the soccer field, at church, etc. The rank and file. They're useful idiots. They only repeat the talking points they hear on MSNBC or on from those Nazis on The View. Okay? And so if you contradict them, that's all you have to do is just simply contradict them. They say, well, this, that, or the other thing is so, and you say, no, it isn't. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do because they got their marching orders from somebody else. They can't pick up the phone and call one of the Nazis on The View and say, well, wait a minute, I used your talking point, and this guy over here says no. What am I supposed to do now? Okay, and if every conservative that they run into tells them no, you're wrong, pretty soon they're going to get discouraged. Part of the reason that the rank and file are on the left is because they win all the time. Winning is easy. Winning is fun. Everybody wants to be a winner and back a winner. And for conservatives, it's easy to win. Understand who you're dealing with. All you have to do is contradict them. They don't have any facts. They don't have any figures. They get all their talking points from television. You do that, they're defeated. And once you've defeated the rank and file, the people like Robert Reich have no support. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
It is a general perception that the Catholic Church is against the members of the LGBT community. Is that really true? First, let's listen to this girl share her concern.
Fortunate truth I've learned as an LGBT Catholic is that you generally can't trust the clergy to care about your life. Now, I believe that these men truly love God, so why don't they show LGBT people, let alone LGBT Catholics, that love?
Bishop Barron reassures Catholic members in the LGBT community that they are first and foremost a child of God, called to a higher moral standard like every other Catholic.
The only thing a gay person hears from the Catholic Church is, you're intrinsically disordered. We got a very serious problem on our hands. If that's what the message has become, the message of the church to a gay person should be, you are a beloved child of God who's been embraced by the mercy of Jesus Christ and invited to a full share in the divine life. You're a son of God, called to eternal life. There's message one.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand quote of the day.
It is an enormous achievement to discover rational selfishness, not acting on the whim or pleasure of the moment, but knowing what is rationally an important goal, of what value is it to you, and how to achieve it. The idea of being rationally selfish is not available to children. It would take a long period of thought or the proper teaching for them to discover it.
And that was Ayn Rand quote of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. So the Republicans have gone ahead and elected a new speaker. And again, none of my business because it's just none of my business. I don't have a say. I don't have a vote. My opinion doesn't matter. Didn't matter, doesn't matter now in terms of who they pick as speaker. That's their problem. Now, so they picked him and he was making a speech and it was on Hugh Hewitt, that a little clip of his speech. And one of the things he said to my friends across the aisle, I want you to know that I am going to be open, I'm going to be transparent, and I'm going to be accountable. And then blah, 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 blah. And right there, he goes wrong. He hands weapons to the Democrats, and weapons with which they can use to shape his speakership and cudgels with which to beat him over the head. Because unless you define your terms, the left is simply going to use those words against you. Every time that you say no as speaker to the Democrats, they're going to cry and say, wait, you said you were going to be transparent. Wait a minute, you said you were going to be accountable. Where's the accountability? Where's the transparency? And so he hasn't been speaker 5 minutes, and he turns over control of his speakership to the Democrats. Congratulations. Back in a minute. Thank you. So in Lewiston, I guess it's Maine, there was a mass murder. 22 people, at the last I saw, were murdered. Remember that. It's very important. If you want to be a true conservative, you've got to get your vocabulary right. If you're a Second Amendment person, it's mass murder. Mass shooting is only going to get you gun control. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. So on Varney and Company, there's one of the guys on the show that said a few minutes ago, he says, I don't understand where this hatred comes from. He's talking about hatred for Israel and Jews. It doesn't make sense to me. It's because he's stupid. It's very, very simple. The hatred comes, and it's not so much that they hate Israel, as really they're just pro-Hamas and pro-Hezbollah and pro-Iran. Why? Because they have revolutionary potential. Hamas represents revolution, so does Hezbollah and Iran. There's no revolutionary potential in Israel. None. Zero. And the left wants their revolution. They want their worldwide revolution ushering in socialist paradise. That's what they've always wanted, and that's what they still want today. And because those two or three organizations have revolutionary potential, they're always going to favor them. And that's all there is to it. Back in a minute. Thank you. So on Varney and Company, they're talking about for the next hour, they're going to have Dr. Ben Carson come on and talk about a school system in the Northwest where students are not going to be required to show basic competency in math or in English, etc., in order to graduate. And the claim is that it would be unfair to students of color. And really what it is all about is leveling. The left is busy trying to get rid of hierarchy. So you don't have smarter students, stupider students. They're busy getting rid of valedictorians and things of that nature. So this is about, again, getting rid of hierarchy. And really what's going to end up happening is it's just going to be, there'll still be hierarchy because hierarchy is protean, but it will end up being a hierarchy of a different sort. So, but this is their way of trying to say we got to make everything fair, even Steven. And no, it's wrong, and they shouldn't do this. And if you're a parent in this school system, you really need to consider putting your child in another school system, whether your child is average, slow, or smart. You need to really consider putting them somewhere else. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
It was the first piece of legislation under the new speaker, a resolution declaring solidarity with Israel. It condemned Hamas, called for the release of hostages, and affirmed Israel's right to defend itself. 9 Democrats voted against it. It wasn't about sending weapons to Israel. No, that comes later. It was about condemning Hamas atrocities. And that's what those 9 Democrats just could not handle. Deep inside the Democrat Party in the House, the terrorists have their supporters. What they want is a Hamas win. That is, no ground invasion and a ceasefire. Think about that. They want to lock in a terrorist victory. As one of our guests on the program said, that's like Emperor Hirohito demanding a ceasefire right after Pearl Harbor. The squad is not done. Soon, the House will discuss a $14 billion security package for Israel. That includes weapons and military equipment. The left will oppose it, and they'll make a lot of any civilian casualties in Gaza. They don't want Israel to defend itself. What these 9 Democrats say goes all the way around the world. The enemies of freedom pick up on their propaganda and repeat it endlessly on social media. They are fueling support for the terrorists who brutalized all those people less than a month ago. This is what Congressman Mike Lawler had to say. Now, he's a Republican from New York. I'm quoting now. They are not worthy of serving in this body. Those members should resign in disgrace. End quote. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
And again, all of this is done under it's supposed to be My Take. It sounds as though it's supposed to be an editorial, but he makes no value statements. He doesn't say whether or not these 9 people are right or wrong. He just he acts as though he's neutral. He just simply describes their behavior. Wrong answer, Mr. Varney. Wrong answer. Though you have to grow the balls to when you see something that's wrong, you need to call it out. This is wrong. It's immoral. It's illegal. It's unethical, etc. And this is one of the reasons that why we have so much trouble in our culture is because nobody's willing to say, use value statements. This is why you don't want to be neutral, because you want to make value statements. And that comes with words like should. What should happen? What should they have done? What should they have said? No answer from Mr. Varney. And of course, the bloody tourist just gets richer and richer and richer. Good for you. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, inside Delta Force.
I started to open the door of my truck, but just stood there for a minute, looking at the cold night sky and watching the vapor cloud of my breath. It was a clear, moonless night, and the stars stood out in bright relief, winking against the eternity of space. The cold door handle felt good in my hand. I slid behind the wheel and coaxed the little engine to life. Man, I've got to rebuild the engine of this thing when I get the chance. I wheeled out the gate and waved goodnight to the old veteran on the night shift. Now, it was my turn. I was sitting in a leather armchair in one of the rooms of the shooting house. The place was furnished like a living room, with sofas and chairs, coffee and end tables, mirrors, pictures, and bookcases. There were even books on the shelves. The lighting was dim. Mannequins and paper targets were positioned about the room. Some held guns and some were empty-handed. They were the terrorists, and I was their hostage. There was an armed mannequin crouched behind me with one hand on my neck and the other on my shoulder, pointing a pistol at the door. Another terrorist stood on my other side, pointing a submachine gun at my head. Within the next 10 minutes, the door would be blown in and 4 of my classmates would assault the room using the close-quarter battle techniques we had learned. Within 3 seconds of the explosion, they had to kill the terrorists, gain positive control of the room, and rescue me. Bullets would rain throughout the room, and someone would be firing live rounds within inches of my head. If they missed a single terrorist or hit me by mistake, the team would fail this phase of training. I sincerely wanted them to pass the exam. My team and I had successfully passed the first test this morning. Marty Johnson had been the hostage, and he had only blinked his eyes when a pair of double taps from my .45 caliber pistol knocked the heads off the terrorist mannequins so close beside him. Then we changed positions within the team and made 3 more assaults in different rooms with other comrades occupying the hot seat. Now that I was here, I realized it was harder to be the shooter than the hostage. To be on the assault team required great confidence in your abilities. To be the hostage required faith in your comrades. It was easier to think of being shot than of shooting a mate. As the minutes ticked by so slowly, I thought about the long, hard path we'd taken to this point. We had spent untold hours on the range and in the shooting house, and had fired hundreds of thousands of rounds to get here, to this room, to this chair. I heard an explosion down the hall, then the immediate stutter of pistols and submachine guns in another room. The firing was over in just a few seconds. I hope that went well. I glanced down at my watch. The assault should be any time now. I sure hope these guys pass their test. I most sincerely do. The door exploded with a flash and a clap, and a shockwave hit me like a punch in the face. I could see the team hurling themselves into the room, see the splashes of fire from the muzzles of their guns, and feel the slap of overpressure as bullets flew by my face. But I can't honestly say I heard any one distinct sound, or that my brain registered any one distinct image. It happened so fast, so suddenly, that even though I was expecting it, it was so completely overpowering that my system was unable to respond until it was all over. The ferocity of the attack stunned me. It was like being struck by lightning, a pure and elemental force. JT was the team leader. As he gave commands to his team to conduct the search, I unfroze enough to turn in my chair and check the terrorist over my shoulder. The mannequin's head was lying on the floor a few feet away, with one hole just under his right cheek and another slightly in front of his ear. The terrorist on my other side had a pair of holes at the base of his throat. The rest of the mannequins and cartoon targets around the room had at least 2 hits in the kill zone. Some had 4, where the 3 and 4 men had added their shots to an already hit target. When the team finished their room search, JT gave me a toothy grin from under his lush mustache. "You okay, Bubba?" he asked as he looked me over from head to toe. Alan had just stepped into the room, and he looked me over along with the rest of the targets. "Yeah, JT, I'm fine. I replied, using the same nonchalant phrase I would later use to answer the same question in a much more dangerous setting. Alan finished his scrutiny of the room. "All right, boys, that's a go. Now do it 3 more times and you're shooting house graduates. But don't let that pressure you or anything." He smiled as he marked his clipboard. "Paste up the targets, put a new head on that dummy, and get ready for the next run-through. JT, have a seat and make yourself comfortable. It's your turn in the barrel." "Give me your equipment, JT," I said, cheerful again as I got up from the chair. "I'll put it down by the reload table in the hallway. And don't worry about a thing, old buddy. We'll be gentle. I know it's your first time." "Yeah, thanks," was all he said as we cleared out of the room. He was uncharacteristically quiet while we hung a new door on the hinges and locked it into place. It all came off without a hitch. Everyone had multiple turns as a hostage and as an assaulter with a live hostage in the room. Nobody was hurt and no targets were missed. And the confidence that life-or-death final examination gave us, in ourselves as much as in our mates, stuck with us for life. I trusted myself and I trusted my comrades in a way that was unshakable. From that point on, no matter the situation, no matter how dangerous, we would prevail. I believed that to the core of my being. I still do. We do more observing and reporting than we do shooting, so perhaps we would be better called observer reporters than snipers, explained the long gun chief, Larry Friedman. "In fact," he went on, "when dealing with outsiders, we use the term sniper observer and not sniper because so much of what we do is scene observation and collection of immediate intelligence. And that's what you guys are going to get a taste of this week." Master Sergeant Larry Friedman, also known by his self-proclaimed radio call sign, Super Jew, loved life like few other human beings I've met. He was intensely interested in people and always amused with life's surprises. He would soon become one of my best friends. Years later, after retiring from the Army and while working for the CIA, he would become the first American killed during America's intervention in Somalia. "Some of you will be selected for assignment to a sniper troop when you've finished OTC," said Friedman. "But all of you have to understand how we do our business. At one time or another on a site, every one of you will pull duty in the TOC, Tactical Operations Center. So it's vitally important you learn our reporting methods and procedures. Also, as you saw on the range last week, snipers will often overwatch your movement and guide assault teams to the target. Or an assault will be sniper-initiated. But more than any of that jazz," he said, jabbing his finger at us, "we don't want you getting in our way and screwing up a shot, and you sure don't want us shooting you." By this time, he was wearing a huge grin that threw deep laugh wrinkles across his face. Larry Friedman had a head full of wiry, prematurely gray hair he was inordinately proud of, and a great thick mustache in luxuriant bloom across the middle of his face. Permanent laugh lines radiated from the corners of his eyes. He would often laugh so hard at some antic he had witnessed or a joke he was telling that the tears would run down his cheeks. Larry worked hard to maintain the chiseled Mr. America body that helped earn him his code name, but he was also a Superman in many other ways. He looked after his snipers like they were his own flesh and blood, and whenever anybody in the unit needed a helping hand or some wise counsel, it was usually Larry who knew what to do or say. He was also known for the battles royal he had with Colonel Beckwith whenever Charlie tried to interfere with what Larry thought was best and right for his snipers. The yelling matches they had were legend in the unit. Years later, while he and I were huddled together in some godforsaken spot of the globe, Larry told me that Beckwith had fired him on 6 separate occasions. "But I'm still here," he crowed, 3 commanders later. The fights they had were merely lovers' spats. Beckwith thought the world of Larry, and Larry thought the same of our commander. This day, however, was our introduction to the world Larry loved so much, the world of the long gunner. First, we'll spend a couple of days getting down the basics of reporting, he said, and then we'll go out to the range and run some practical exercises. You guys are going to enjoy this, I guarantee. Now, let me introduce your instructor, Branislav Urbonsky. He'll be your guide the rest of the week. Branislav Urbonsky was an extraordinary character, and he too became one of my best friends. Branislav escaped from Poland in the late 1960s and made his way to America when he was just a teenager. Once here, he discovered that the fastest way to an American citizenship was via the military, so he joined up. His use of the English language and view of American culture had been learned in the U.S. Army, specifically in the old separate ranger companies, and because of that, both were a little off-center of the prevailing societal norms. In Branislav's face, you could see the Tartar blood deposited in the Slavic gene pool by the armies of the Khans. He had high cheekbones, a broad brow, and wide-set eyes that disappeared into slits when he was either deadly serious or highly amused. He looked like the middleweight boxer he was, with a strong jaw and chin, broad shoulders, long arms, and an almost necklace head that sat squarely on his shoulders. He was fluent in Polish, Russian, German, and English. Like most expatriate Poles, Branislav was a rabid nationalist, and I've never seen a man rejoice as he did when Poland slipped the Soviet yoke some years later. But beyond all that, Branislav was one of our premier snipers, and now he took us under the wing of his knowledge and ability and explained things we would have to know, starting with how to look at a building and report what we saw. On the face of it, that sounds like a pretty simple procedure. But with sniper teams posted all around a crisis point, it takes some hard and fast reference points to keep the situation from turning into a Tower of Babel. Branislav taught us how to impose order on potential chaos. The idea is simplicity itself. Buildings are given a color code to designate a specific side. The front is designated white, the back of the target black. The target's own left is red, and its right is green. Floors or levels are given a phonetic alphabet designation in ascending order. Thus, the first floor is labeled Alpha, the second Bravo, the third Charlie, and so on. Yes, some buildings have more floors than the alphabet has letters, and we had a means of handling that. All openings in the building, whether doorways or windows, were numbered on their respective floors from left to right. For example, if I were observing the front of the building and saw something happen in the 6th window on the 7th floor, I would record and report the location as follows: White, Golf, 6. Back at the sniper TOC, the information would be logged and plotted on the target schematic. All other sniper teams would immediately know what happened and where, and as soon as I said white, the teams on the other sides of the building knew that it was something outside their own zones of observation. We used the same means of identification on planes, trains, buses, and boats. In fact, it was adapted from the method of marking the sides of ships and planes with navigation lights, red for the left or port side, and green for the right or starboard side of the vessel. Bronny pointed out that by patient, careful observation and reporting, the snipers could build up an extremely valuable body of information on a terrorist crisis scene. Details such as which areas were used, and just as important, which areas were not, the location of hostages, the actions the terrorists would take during periods of heightened tension, their leadership, rest schedule, and a million other things that helped build accurate profiles of them as individuals. Delta Force snipers are chosen only after extensive additional psychological testing and evaluation. There are a number of attributes you look for in a sniper, and there are two of paramount importance to avoid. The first characteristic is what we called the Texas Tower Syndrome, referencing Charles Whitman's massacre of 14 people from the bell tower of the University of Texas in 1966. That characteristic manifests itself when a sniper starts shooting and he can't stop. It just feels so good, such an overwhelming sense of power, that he can't turn it off when there are no more legitimate targets left. He'll continue to shoot anyone in sight. It is a very real compulsion, and I've heard its siren call in my own ear. The second characteristic takes a much different, more understandable form. This one we termed the Munich Massacre Syndrome. Think of it like this. A sniper spends most of his time watching, observing, getting to know his targets. Through his high-power spotting scope, a sniper can see the features on the faces of the terrorists as clearly as if he were in the room with them. He sees them when they smile and sneeze and eat a sandwich and get drowsy, and as they manifest all the other little things that identify each of us as uniquely human. But they don't know he can see them. They have no idea where he is. They don't even know he exists. The terrorists represent no personal threat to the sniper whatsoever. They are far away. They can't harm him. They can't kill him. As the sniper spends hour after hour observing his targets through his spotting scope, he gets to know the people he is watching as human beings, and he becomes intimate with them. And then, when the order to shoot is given, he can't do it. He can't kill these people he has come to know, these people who are no threat to his life. That's what happened at the Munich Olympics massacre in 1972. When the order was given to shoot the Black September terrorists who had taken 11 Israeli athletes hostage, the German police sharpshooters couldn't pull the trigger. They had observed the hostage-takers for such a long time and developed such a sense of empathy for them, they couldn't bring themselves to kill people they felt they now knew. The terrorists were then able to kill the Israeli Olympic athletes under their control. The psychological niche where you'll find the man who can shoulder aside these two behavioral opposites is very narrow. The ideal is a man who, from the safety of long range, can kill when it is required, but is immune to the impulse to continue killing when the situation is resolved. A man whose psyche is strong and so fundamentally rooted in a personal philosophy or religion that he doesn't suffer unduly from taking human life under appropriate conditions. The snipers of Delta Force are decent, thoughtful, intelligent, and unshakable men. By their demeanor, they could easily be taken for academics. Very fit, powerful, and deadly academics, perhaps, but professorial just the same. After our talk, the class divided in half, and Bronislav took my group into the other classroom to begin our practical exercise. On a large table in the middle of the classroom was an 8-story building in miniature, so perfectly detailed it could have been part of a movie set. It had windows and doorways, wide canopied primary entrances, fire escapes, a rooftop garden, and an outdoor restaurant. Inside the hotel, as we called it, lights could be turned on and off in various rooms. There were even miniature cardboard cutouts of people, some of whom were armed, who could be made to appear and disappear by a series of strings running up through the bottom. Outside, there were a few sidewalks and trees, and cars and trucks parked in the adjacent streets. Branislav gave us the instructions for the training session. Half of us were positioned around the room in observer positions that gave all-around coverage of the building. At each position were a notebook and pen, a pair of binoculars, a camera with telephoto lens, a compass, and a radio. Larry Friedman had taken the other half of the class to another room where they would establish and man a sniper TOC. Some would operate the radios in the TOC, others would transcribe the received data, and still others would plot the reported activity on a sketch of the building drawn from data radioed in by the observers.
And that was the next part of Preparing the Force from Inside Delta Force by Command Sergeant Major Eric Haney, retired. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.